essentially, the United States is holding back the entire world now in addressing this very grave issue. So what I'll be doing tonight is, first we're going to start off and just kind of set the context. This is a very grave issue. It's very far advanced. And I just want to show, again, real briefly, what's at stake. And then we'll get into our proposal for addressing global warming. We're not going to talk a lot about impacts tonight. It's mostly, one way I refer to it is the big solution answer to the big problem depicted in Outdoors may be the truth. So sit back and enjoy this. It'll take a while. We're going to give a very comprehensive picture. But as you think about the problem of global warming, and most people are pretty concerned about it now, it's good also to have in your mind a concrete, comprehensive plan that conceivably could address the problem. And that's what we hope to give you tonight. So a lot of it comes down to the global warming fight is, what are we willing to fight for? And it turns out with global warming, there are just incredible things at stake. This is the generation that will decide the fate of the polar bear. So again, the iconic creature of the Arctic depends on the ice, where it has a hunting advantage over seals. Seals are phenomenal swimmers. The only way polar bears can catch seals is not by swimming. They have to sit by their breathing holes. If they don't have an ice platform to hunt from, they die. Alpine meadows, this affects us here in Montana. All around the world, glaciers are retreating, and as they retreat, and as temperature gradients move up mountain areas, all kinds of unique, beautiful ecosystems are threatened. Coral reefs, one of the marvels of creation, dramatically impacted by global warming. As sea surface temperatures rise, it stresses coral. If it becomes too hot, they can die. Another grave threat to coral reefs is the increasing acidification of the ocean. As carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere increase, carbon dioxide is dissolved in seawater at a heightened rate, creating carbonic acid. Again, very, very harmful to marine life. Coral reefs all around the world are threatened. The economy. Enormous amounts of money are being spent compensating for natural disasters. All this money that can be spent on many urgent human needs. You know, here in the United States, we are definitely threatened by global warming, but for many of us, it's a longer-term threat. We don't feel physically threatened. But when you look at a country like Bangladesh, they just had flooding there. 40% of the entire country was underwater. And most of these people don't have TVs, but they have radios. They know what's going on. Sea level is already rising. And we think about what a tragedy it is for Katrina in the United States, where we lost 2,000 Americans. They had a storm in the early 90s. They lost 187,000 people in Bangladesh. And then the all-time loss of life was a storm in Bangladesh that killed 1 million people in 1970. It's an entirely different situation. They are physically, they're frightened, and they are in a very helpless position. So we need to think of these people, and I think probably maybe the best way to start, because sometimes we look at this problem and it feels overwhelming, is let's look at them as our brothers and sisters. Because in a sense they are. There's one human family. We need to find a way to live in harmony with creation and not do things that are making their lives even more challenging than they already are. Already the UN estimates 150,000 people a year are dying from global warming, mostly women and children in Africa. About 70% of economic activity in Africa is sustainable, is subsistence agriculture. And so it's highly rain dependent. And there's been a lot of shifts in weather patterns, and there are several lines of scientific evidence that are pointing to the warming of the Indian Ocean, which is related to the increase in greenhouse gas emissions. So again, the things that we're doing with fossil fuels affect people in distant parts of the globe. And then we just need to think about children everywhere. And actually, for me, I'm in my 40s now. When I'm speaking on college campuses, or I've gone to some conferences where there are a lot of college students. I personally feel bad that college students are coming of age, and I remember when I came out of college, I was all excited. I had a job in Yosemite National Park, and there's a sense of freedom and liberation. And then to be faced with this overwhelming environmental problem, that makes me feel bad. I feel like that we've undermined the most fundamental obligation we have to our young, and that is to pass on a livable planet. And that obligation is being undermined right now. One of the things that we need to observe in terms of trends that are underway is to look at the Arctic ice sheet. About 4 out of 5 times for the past 5 years. Each year the ice sheet is getting smaller. It's a major air conditioner for the planet. Ice is the most effective reflector of sunlight. Open water is the most effective absorbent of sunlight. And so as the ice sheet recedes, you create more and more open water, it holds more solar energy, and you can get into what's called a positive feedback loop. And scientists believe that this is starting to take hold in the Arctic, where the momentum of the warming starts to feed on itself. In the past week alone, an area the size of Great Britain was lost on the ice sheet. And scientists studying this said, we're stunned. It's happening so fast. This is permafrost. Another critical thing to watch, especially in Siberia. Billions of tons of greenhouse gases are sequestered in frozen soil and plants, and they're starting to notice that this is warming. If that goes, we won't be able to address the issue of global warming because the amount of fossil fuels, even if we cut them down completely, will be overwhelmed by this natural thing that's starting to in places like Siberia. Here in the northern Rockies, in 2006, scientists first published a link between global warming and the severity and increase of wildfires, the frequency and severity of wildfires. So right now in Missoula, in every direction, we are surrounded by forests that are drying out, partly because of greenhouse gas emissions from human activity. So wherever you look, this thing is having a very major impact. There's industrial momentum. Right now, 1,200 coal plants are planned to be built around the world, mostly in China, India, and the United States, in about the next 10 years. That simply cannot happen. And we're starting to see an incredibly hopeful trend that manifested itself in Missoula a couple weeks ago. As many of you know, Missoula signed a letter of intent to take electricity from a coal plant near Great Falls. And it was very little publicity when it happened in the city council, but after it happened, people started to become aware of this decision that had been made, and groups like mine, which have a large email list, and other environmental groups in Montana, heard about it, sent out a message to people in Missoula, and told them to contact the mayor and the city council, and the response was explosive. I mean, they did not expect it. They were completely buried by emails. The mayor's email box was overflowing, and he told me that he was very surprised that people were so shook up about this. But shortly thereafter, the letter of intent was withdrawn. Now that is part of a drama playing out all across the United States. There's a lot of coal plants planned here, about 160, but everywhere they're trying to put a coal plant in, they're finding a lot of resistance, not only from the general public, but from investors. Because what's happening is the world is waking up to global warming, and there's going to be a price at some point put on carbon dioxide emissions that will raise the cost of producing electricity from fossil fuels, especially coal. So this is a really hopeful thing that's happening in Missoula, and it's happening all over the country. We need to maximize that very hopeful trend. Global population is real simple. On a finite planet, you cannot have infinite population and resource consumptive growth. You just can't. It's mathematically impossible. And this is the trend that we're seeing right now. There's decisions that we can be making today at very low cost so that couples around the world that want access to reproductive planning services that don't have access to them, but get them, use them, and we could dramatically lower our long-term population forecast. Now, I wanted to point out this issue of Siberia because it plays into why we feel there needs to be a very aggressive and rapid move away from fossil fuels. The whole idea of Rosie Revisited, as you might guess, is based on Rosie the Riveter from World War II. There actually was an Italian woman named Rosie that riveted an incredible amount of airplane wings. And there was this nickname, Rosie the Riveter. It became part of a public war spirit thing to encourage women to work in the munitions industry. We feel that there's a lot of dramatic parallels between what we did in World War II and what we feel the United States needs to do today. So that's the idea. Now, in 1990 is when the top climate scientists in the world said, in order to address global warming and stabilize CO2, we have to cut 60 to 80% our carbon dioxide emissions globally and immediately. Now, most people aren't aware of that. How many people knew that just in this room? One. I mean, most people, this is the kind of thing, if we had a media that really was working in the public interest, this would be out in the media all the time. But essentially, the UN set up a body of scientists in 1988. It's called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's the top scientific body addressing global warming. It's about 2,000 of the top climate scientists from 130 countries. They issued their first report in 1990. My organization was founded all around the idea of faithfully representing what they said to do in 1990. 1990, they said, cut emissions 60 to 80% globally and immediately. We absolutely did not do that. In fact, today, emissions are at an all-time high and rising. But what if we had? If we had in 1990 said, all right, this is unequivocal, the science is very strong, we need to move quickly, let's start reducing emissions, we might not be seeing the melting of the Siberian permafrost. So, as we move into this phase now, where catastrophe is drawing closer, we need to remember we need to move as aggressively as possible and fight the big fight now while we have time before it becomes hopeless. And we've done this before. This was the situation in the 1930s. Adolf Hitler, basically a racist madman with the best military in the world and bent on world domination. Terrifying time. And we were one country among a few that had the possibility to stand up to him, but we were woefully unprepared. You can see some basic statistics there. They had the finest infantry in the world. We only had 5 divisions compared to their 136. They had been ordered to disarm at the end of World War I, so they got rid of all their old weapons. And then Hitler came to power and said, great, we have no weapons. So they built all new weapons that were working around the clock. You could go to Germany in the 1930s at night in Ruhr Valley, and you see these enormous munitions factories and blast furnaces lighting up the night sky. That was Germany. And then on the other ocean, Japan. Surprise attack on the U.S. Navy at Pearl Harbor. Again, we were completely unprepared for that. It's very lucky that most of the aircraft carriers weren't in dock. But all of a sudden, we're faced with these 2 very aggressive countries that have united with Italy in a consortium called the Axis Powers. So again, this is why we thought Rosie Revisited is the best historical analogy for the threat of global warming. There's no question that what we faced in World War II was a dire threat. There's a very good chance that we could have lost that war. Today, global warming, most serious environmentalists consider it the greatest threat facing humanity today. You look at the information, it's pretty discouraging. I mean, this thing is really far advanced. And then there's this problem with political will. As we'll show tonight in a few minutes, the technology is there, we can afford to deploy it, we can deploy it very rapidly. It's already happening in some places in the world. But in order for that to happen, there has to be sufficient political will. at the outset of World War II, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, knew that eventually we were going to have to confront Germany and Japan. But in the United States, there was memories of World War I and all the pain that had caused. And there was an extremely powerful isolationist sentiment that he had to deal with on a daily basis. Every time he moved in that direction, this very powerful thing would confront him. So he did all that he could to prepare, but there wasn't much he could do in a very broad way until Pearl Harbor. So again, there was insufficient political will. Then the final thing, and this is the most important for a room of Americans, if the United States adequately addresses global warming, there is real hope that the world will address this threat. If we do not, there is zero chance, and I mean zero, there's no chance that the world will be able to overcome all the emissions we produce in the United States and somehow do it on their own. As one Japanese diplomat said it, there's no way that half the boat is going to sink. The interesting thing about global warming, and one of the reasons I've been working on this issue full-time for about 4 years, and I've been involved in it for about 10 years, is it's very clear what needs to be done to address it. It's crystal clear. The main cause of global warming is excessive burning of coal, oil, and natural gas. We need to reduce those emissions as rapidly as possible. So again, this is perhaps the most influential scientific statement ever issued. And when you hear people talk about how there's a lot of confusion in the scientific community about the human cause of global warming, that's just not true. And there's also people say that, well, the process is flawed. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is the most rigorously peer-reviewed scientific collaboration in history. It's the largest, it's the best funded, it's a phenomenal scientific enterprise, and we can be very confident in the conclusions that they'll reach. Okay, this is the graph that was part of the humorous part of Inconvenient Truth, where Al Gore is actually going up on a lift to show this. This is what we had for a very, very long period of time. Centuries and centuries and centuries, very stable CO2. And then the Industrial Revolution started in 1750, and also massive deforestation, which is another contributing factor. And then it just started on this upward line. We're up here, it's going up a little over 2 parts per million a year. We need to take this and bend it down. This is safety, this is instability, this is catastrophe. So we need to stop this rise and pull it down as fast as possible. A lot of the politics in the United States comes down to a question of urgency. Is it a basement that needs to be cleaned up, or is it a fire in your house? Obviously, there's a time dimension there that varies for both of those. If you don't clean up your basement this week, you go down 2 weeks, it's probably going to be about the same kind of task you'll face. If you let a fire that started in your house get further out of control, you're going to have a much bigger fire to fight. This is precisely what has happened in the world since 1990. 1990, the scientists said there's a fire starting, get on it right away, or you're going to have a much bigger problem to face, and that's what we have now. So what's coming down in the United States is, do we need an incremental move away from renewable energy, away from fossil fuels to a renewable energy system, or should we move in a wartime mobilization speed scenario? This is where the major environmental groups are in the United States. Sometimes called the Big Green. They finally come around to saying that we want to cut 80%, and they say let's do that by 2050, 43 years from now. Al Gore, again, deep cuts are needed by 2050. Our proposal rejects the incremental approach. We've had an incremental approach since 1990, and now we're in a much more dangerous situation. We have to move away from fossil fuels as quickly as possible. And so Rosie Revisited is the most aggressive emissions reduction program in the United States. I released it at the US Capitol in July. And I'll be going to start to lobby Congress this fall in order to get bills reflecting this emissions reduction proposal. Some people say, well, why is this a heavy emphasis on a federal program? What about personal environmental ethics? Well, that's a critical part of it as well. It makes you feel better. It sets up a good ethical framework. If you're doing what you can ask for larger changes, not only from other people, but from levels of government. But there's no way that we can address this enormous threat of global warming without prompt, well-funded, coordinated federal leadership. The corollary to the analogy to World War II would be, instead of coming up with a coordinated plan with the military and our allies, instead FDR said, why doesn't everybody go out and get a pistol? And that's how we're going to fight it. I mean, it just wouldn't have worked. So it's important that we do everything we can on a personal level, a local level, a state level. The big thing that's holding back humanity is the policy of the U.S. government. Money. I mean, some of the resources that we need, for example, to flip over the vehicles in the United States, the average car in the United States lasts about 15 years. We can't have high gas consumptive vehicles lasting for 15 years. There needs to be very strong incentives so people can turn those over and get high efficiency vehicles. That takes federal resources. The city of Missoula, the state of Montana, most states don't have those kind of resources. The other thing is coordination. There's a lot of things that we have to do in a short amount of time. It has to be coordinated. The other thing, and this is one of the things that business is asking for in increasing numbers and with increasing urgency, is we want uniform regulations. We don't want a hodgepodge of regulations all around the United States. Tell us what the game plan is, tell us how much carbon it's going to cost, tell us when you're going to start the programs, tell us what the incentives are, tell us what the penalties are, put it into law and pass the law, and then we will find a way to adapt to it. A lot of businesses are starting to say that. Their numbers are growing steadily. And then finally, having a good federal program means maximizing not only federal and international initiatives, but also state initiatives. One of the things that you would do is you would have very well-funded block grants that cities like Missoula could apply for so that we could take care of all of our bike transit needs in Missoula, so that we could put in a trolley system, which we should definitely be considering. So there's a lot of reasons to have the federal system, and that's the thing that's holding everything back. This is a perfect example. Rush hour traffic. There's no way that we can, I mean, we have this system of enormous momentum. It's not only that we have cars that consume a lot of gas, but we have federal programs that guarantee homes for mortgages. We build roads. There's all kinds of subsidies for suburban sprawl. Those have to be addressed. And they have to be addressed at the federal level. Now, this thing that happened in World War II was phenomenal. My parents grew up in New York City, and they told me a lot of the things that happened there in World War II. My grandfather was a New York City police officer. In his neighborhood, there was a warden that would go around at night and tell people to turn off their lights so that enemy planes couldn't see the city when they flew in, if they were near New York, which was a real possibility. They had victory gardens. My grandfather was a gardener. They had a victory garden, and enormous amounts of vegetables, fruits were produced in victory gardens so that more food could be sent overseas, not only for our own troops, but for other countries that were having trouble feeding their own people. There was all kinds of recycling, and I think that there was actually a lot of fun. I mean, this guy's having a good time right here. He's got a colander on his head. This was a real civic spirit, and it's just, we're social animals, and it's one of the things that pulling together around a noble goal is something that's very exciting for me. Again, a lot of women's roles radically redefined, never to turn back. This is an ad, obviously, inviting women to enlist in the military. Again, different kinds of ad campaigns that they had, use artists. There's a lot of scrap metal lying on farms, old cars. This is, everything was rationed. Unbelievable unbelievable ration. You just wouldn't believe they would ration coffee, which that caused a big uproar. I mean, that could have killed the war effort right there. They rationed tires. They rationed gasoline, which meant like you only got so much, and then you're out of gas. So you couldn't have these Sunday drives. All kinds of food items were rationed. Again, we can do it. This country came together at blinding speed, and all of a sudden we're pushing the same direction. It changed the course of history. This is kind of I have mixed feelings about this photo. These children are bringing fat to the school. Does anybody know what the fat's going to be used for? Explosives. Anyway, civic participation for the war effort. Okay, again, there's a phenomenal economic driver with global warming and the response to global warming. Just some basic statistics. Again, this happened in a very short time. It really took off after the attack on Pearl Harbor. And then the war was over in a little over 3 years. There's a phenomenal job creation power in renewable energy. We're currently on a job destroying path. The job creating power of renewable energy is about 3 to 5 times that of fossil fuels. So when people say that we can't make a rapid shift to renewable energy because we'll destroy a lot of jobs, you have to ask them about how many jobs will be created and how many of them will be clean jobs compared to work in coal mines, for example. Okay, so here's our plan. This is the current energy system in the United States. As you might expect, heavily dominated by fossil fuels, 85%, coal, oil, natural gas, 11% nuclear and hydro, 3% biomass, which is essentially plant material that is non-fossil. I mean, fossil fuels used to be plants, as we know. Biomass is non-fossil materials that are burned to make electricity. They're used for space heating. They can be gasified. They can be turned into liquid fuels to run vehicles. And then a tiny slice for geo, solar, and wind. Again, this is the system that we have today. It's pretty similar to what most of the world has. There's, some variation, but most world economies are heavily, heavily dominated by fossil fuels. This is what we propose that we have in 2025. We recommend that the transition start in 2010. Kyoto runs out in 2012. Some people say, well, they should start in 2012. We feel that if we can come up with a very ambitious plan, we should start 2 years early because the problem is that serious. We also feel that if the world gets its act together, ambitious plan that can address global warming, we are going to feel so good about ourselves that we'll be ready to start as soon as possible. Okay, I'm going to spend a little time on this because I kind of like this to be fused into your memory. This is the answer according to our research and the proposal that we have on the table now. Okay, 85% fossil fuels would drop down to 15%. We propose that nuclear and hydro stay at 11%. In other words, no new nuclear or no new major hydro. Conservation. Okay, let's talk about conservation and efficiency. There's these two terms here. Conservation, efficiency, what do they mean? Efficiency means doing the same thing, but doing it with less use of energy. Conservation means doing less. I'll give you an example. Instead of driving your pickup to Seattle 3 times a year, you drive your Prius. Same thing, you get in a vehicle, you drive to Seattle, it takes the same amount of time. That's efficiency. Conservation would be, you go to Seattle once or twice a year instead of 3 times. Okay, it's just right off the top, reduce consumption. The United States needs to do this more than any other country in the world. A lot of the renewable energy proposals that you'll see do not involve such a huge chunk of conservation. we think that this would be relatively easy to achieve because we waste so much. Okay, 20% wind. Wind is the fastest source of new electric power generation in the world right now. 13% solar photovoltaic, and I'm going to have more information and photos on each of these technologies in just a minute here, but I've shown you how it all falls together. 9% solar thermal, fascinating technology that has phenomenal potential, not only in the United States, but in the Middle East, Australia, North Africa. Biomass, 10%. Talked about that. Pellet stoves, that's biomass. When you burn wood, a lot of people think that sounds really dirty, but if you burn wood at very high temperatures, it's a very efficient use of fuel, very clean, and then the huge growth of plants sequesters the carbon dioxide that you burn. But you have to burn it very hot, which means you have to contain the fire, and there's a lot of different things. Technology for this is much more developed in countries like in Northern Europe, which have been dealing with a wood-scarce environment for a very long time. In the United States, we've had so much wood, we developed this tradition of fireplaces. We put them on the edge of the house instead of in the center where the heat could heat the whole house. We use fireplaces, this huge thing which sucks the heat out of the house. It's just total madness. So again, burn wood at high temperatures, and that can be a part of the answer to global warming. Geothermal, using the heat of the earth, or actually the stable temperature of the earth to heat and cool buildings, or in some cases to produce electricity. And then this little slice right here, 0.5% we propose come from wave tidal electricity. Fascinating technology, enormous potential in the world's waves. Okay, that's the plan, that's our proposal, that's how it falls together. Let's look at each of the individual technologies. Okay, now efficiency. What we propose is a 21% increase in efficiency. Now, there wasn't a slice in that chart for efficiency because we propose that by integrating efficiency measures, we'll be using the same amount of energy in the United States now as we will be in 2025. Just from efficiency. Doesn't include conservation, doesn't include renewable energy. Just from efficiency, take it right off the top, and all the projected growth in energy would come from efficiency gains. And again, 21%, that's modest. We could do more than that, but we feel like that's a very, very doable thing. And studies have shown that it can be done in the United States. Okay, some common examples. Changing light bulbs, very common. Most people know about this. You know, I heard a really disturbing statistic from the state of Wisconsin. Incandescent, compact fluorescent light bulbs have been around now for over 10 years. They did a study in Wisconsin, and they wanted to find out the percentage of households in the state that had installed at least one compact fluorescent. There's less than 20%. This is, again, another reason you have to have federal leadership, because compact fluorescents save money, but that doesn't mean that people are going to go out and do it. I think if we have to, we need to hire people to go knock on doors, and walk in, do an energy assessment, bring light bulbs, sell them to people, make it happen. You know, it just takes money and coordination to do it. It's not going to happen just from voluntary measures. Okay, here's a range of options for vehicles in the United States at this point. Of course, the better solution, and this is part of our proposal, is that we reduce vehicle miles traveled. Way better to ride a bike than to drive a Prius. Much less to go out and buy a new Prius. But again, Prius is a good choice if you're going to buy a new vehicle. There also should be trolley systems in every city in the country and an inner-city rail system. In the early 20th century, the United States had a rail system that was the envy of the world. We need to bring it back. Okay. Wind power is taking off all around the world, including the United States. Now again, it's taking off in the United States. There is federal support. It needs to be more aggressive. I don't want you to think that there's nothing good happening in renewable energy in the United States. That's hardly the case. But again, we don't have time for an incremental shift. We need to do this as fast as possible. Now, a few fascinating things about this photo. The turbines are in full operation. No smoke, okay? No water, like you need in coal plants, for example, and nuclear plants. They're letting a child walk through the power plant. Would you let a child walk through a coal plant? No, it's a safe vision. It's humane. And then the final thing, they're growing food. It's either barley or wheat. This is such an enticing vision. Staggering potential for wind. Not only are renewable energy sources abundant, they are super abundant. And they're essentially inexhaustible. The bottom thing is one of the things that is very critical in terms of driving the siting of renewable energy technologies of all kinds. And that's when you can produce a power proposal and say, this is going to be cheaper current dollar amounts than the fossil fuel alternative. Now, there's one thing that we need to remember about that, is that our current economic system has this extraordinary liability that we need to get rid of if we're going to be serious about living in harmony with the earth. We need to take into account environmental costs when looking at different things that we want to do in terms of economics. Currently, most environmental costs are given a cost of 0. Now, it's very difficult to come up with environmental cost assessments. For example, what's the environmental cost of losing polar bears? Okay, well, you could look at tourism in the Arctic. It's pretty small. You could look at the film business for National Geographic, pretty small. You could look at the economic impact for Native people who hunt polar bears. Again, it's big for them, pretty small thing. But what's the dollar value of children that are born today never seeing a polar bear? Well, that's priceless. So it's hard to put an exact dollar amount on things like that. But we know it's not 0. And so if we were incorporating environmental costs into power decisions now, wind power would be much cheaper than coal. I mean, just think of, right now in the United States, 1 in 10 women of childbearing age have elevated levels of mercury in their wombs. The biggest source of methylmercury in the atmosphere is coal burning. Okay, that's already happening. We have mercury-impaired fisheries all over the United States. Why are we burning coal? So if you included the environmental costs now, wind would already be fantastically cheaper than coal. And even solar, which is relatively expensive in economic terms, would be cheaper. It's important to keep that in mind, even if it doesn't enter the discussion as often as it should. Okay, solar photovoltaic, this is a big thing for homeowners. The solar industry now in the United States and around the world is extraordinarily dynamic. In 2005, the top 4 initial public offerings of stock were all solar companies. Venture capital last year in clean energy grew at 76%, I think. Unbelievable. In fact, it's really interesting that's happening in an investment climate. Typically what happens in the entrepreneurial world with venture capital is that the entrepreneurs have an idea and they don't have the money to develop it. And so they go looking for money. Well, guess what's happening now? There's so much private money pouring into renewable energy that they aren't finding enough things to invest in. So the people with the money are hunting down entrepreneurs and finding them. Like sometimes people in these, their garages or they're not being noticed, and they're finding that they're getting money because the people that really know about profits and the business models for renewable energy know it's a phenomenal investment opportunity, and we're just at the beginning of it right now. Think back to the telecommunications and computer boom. Very large industry, extraordinarily profitable, rapid growth. That industry is dwarfed by energy. Energy is massive. And solar photovoltaics is one of the things that's developing very, very rapidly. Now, we had a program in the United States where the federal government provided 40% of the cost of a new solar installation under Jimmy Carter. And Reagan was elected, that program was jumped. We still are not approaching the levels of research and development that we had in the Carter administration. But again, solar panels, a big part of the answer. A couple things to watch with solar power. One is the efficiency that the light is converted to electricity. The average solar panel that you buy today converts 14% of the light into electricity. The best you can get on the market today, about 21%. Last year, they had a breakthrough in a company called Spectralab. They got the conversion efficiency up to over 40%. So all kinds of things. Even the Defense Department has a huge solar program right now because they see the potential for military applications. So the conversion efficiency is one thing to watch. Another thing to watch is the substrate that the solar panels are mounted on. Now here, these are rigid panels, aluminum frames. In some cases, they're rigid plastic. They're developing technologies now to put solar panels on flexible substrates so that you can put them on curvilinear structures. You can insert them into windows, and you can produce them on equipment that is very similar to newspaper printing technology. Brings down the cost of production, and then you get electricity for a lower price. Now, to demonstrate how dynamic and rapidly changing this industry is, this square here, 100 by 100 miles, if that was covered with solar panels, would provide 100% electricity for the United States. That's what this chart is all about. This chart is now dated. One of the principals of the company Spectralab said, he took this very statistic and said, we'll do a 55 by 55 mile square and we'll produce all the electricity for the United States. Okay? One of the things you hear in the media now, all the time, including New York Times reporters that should know better, is that the potential of renewable energy is limited. We have to develop all this technology for a very long time. God, we just can't do it. It's so pathetic. It's completely false. Keep this statistic in mind. Okay, just another way to look at it. One of the advantages of solar panel is that we already have existing infrastructure. Why not put solar panels on roofs around the country? Spain has passed a law that any new construction and any major renovation has to involve solar equipment. Again, government leadership drives the programs. This is an interesting thing called a power tower. Very simple. This is like a greenhouse type structure here. It's huge. You can see these buildings right here for comparison. Sun comes in, just the greenhouse gets super hot, creates this vortex that goes up this tower, and guess what's in the tower? Turbines that produce electricity. Again, no emissions. They even have methods with solar thermal technology to make them provide baseload power. One of the challenges with wind and sun is that they're intermittent resources. And what do you do when it's dark or not windy? There's a lot of things you can do, it turns out, for a reasonable cost. One of the things I can do with solar thermal is direct the heat for producing electricity to a mass of salt, and then the salt absorbs the heat, maintains the heat through the night. It's so hot you can still produce electricity at 3 in the morning from the hot salt. Again, very straightforward technology. Already demonstrated. Biomass, again, using plant material for a variety of needs. Pellet stoves is one example. There are liquid fuels that you can use, but again, we have to be very careful with how it's done. There's a great potential for abuse. One of the things that's happened with the world biofuels market is Europe has mandated 5.75% of their fuels by 2010 come from biological sources. they've started sourcing biofuels in Southeast Asia. That's driving the market there. They're cutting down rainforest to put up biofuel plants to fuel cars in Europe. It's madness. There's been a lot of attention to this. The Indonesian government is on the defensive about this, and it appears to be that it's starting to shift. They're trying to develop certification methods so that the biofuels does not come from environmentally destructive methods. So if you're going to be operating a biofuel vehicle and you're buying from, you don't know where the fuel is coming from, make sure you ask. My friend just bought a Jetta diesel in Seattle, and I told him to make sure that he was getting his biofuels from, not from the rainforest, and he did. He was able to find a source that did that. This is what the Department of Energy says about biofuels. Again, very obvious thing, it's a phenomenal rural development scheme because there's just a lot of money that would normally go into urban areas, can be redistributed to rural areas. But again, there's a lot of things that have to be done well to make it work well. It's possible to concentrate that money that goes into rural areas in huge corporations, and it's already starting to happen, definitely. So if you wanted to go to small, medium-sized farming operations, you have to write that into law to make it happen. Brazil is the best example in the world of vehicular fuel biofuels. They've had a program for a very long time producing biofuels from sugarcane, which is far better than the energy balance you get from producing corn, producing biofuels from corn. And they've reduced their oil import dependency to around zero. Can be done. Okay, it's a geothermal plant in California. They take hot water from the interior of the earth, not really from the interior, from below the surface of the earth. They don't go down, thousands of miles. They go down a few miles, and they get very hot water. Same principle, produces electricity. This is again another way of looking at that. You can also have geothermal systems for homes. The temperature of the earth is relatively stable year-round, and so you snake these coils through your backyard, connect them to a heat pump in your house. Then in the winter, you take that water that's circulating through there, and you extract heat from it, so that lowers your heat bill and obviously your greenhouse gas emissions. And then in the summer, you take that same water. Did I say this correctly? Yes. So you take the same water for cooling in the summer, and then that reduces any air conditioning load that you have. And then very, very positive feedback. They're finding 3 to 7 years of payback on geothermal systems for home use. Wave tidal power. Anybody that's swam in the ocean knows it's just, or rivers, water is just phenomenally powerful. Medium, also waves. They go around the clock in the ocean, so it's 24/7 power source. Environmental studies are very positive. There's different ways to do it. One of the systems that's being installed off the coast of Oregon uses aqua buoys. See how big they are here. People standing here. Then they vertically are moored in the ocean. They're connected to an undersea cable. And there's an up and down motion from waves that produces electricity. This company says they're going to be producing wave electric power that's cheaper than coal by 2010, 3 years away. Okay, one of the biggest wedges in our proposal, again, is lifestyle conservation. Missoula is a great town to take advantage of that. Biking, mass transit, buying your food locally. We got to look at suburban sprawl. We just need to make living in the city really appealing. And we need to make living in the suburbs less appealing and also less affordable. Again, major political battle there, but we have to stop subsidizing suburban sprawl. And also, a lot of the things that are coming forth in terms of the environment are requiring us to slow down, to consume less, to cherish this incredible planet that we have. And I think that, especially a town like Missoula, where there's so much interest in the outdoors and so much access to unspoiled nature, that we have a lot to teach. We can show that this lifestyle that is being forced upon us, I think, is an enormously desirable lifestyle in so many ways. But if we don't address global warming, we're going to have a lifestyle forcing us that we're going to find very unpleasant and possibly totally unmanageable. Again, inspiring examples from around the world. Does anybody know who this is? It's not a Japanese game show host. It's the former Prime Minister of Japan. And he started a program called Cool Biz and Warm Biz. And he started off with Cool Biz by telling all his members of his cabinet, and this is in Japan, a pretty uptight country, very formal, like, you need to start reporting to work without a tie, and I'm going to, as the Prime Minister, not report with a tie to work in the summer. He required of cabinet ministers, and then they required of all the departments of government, and then it became the nucleus of a popular program to save energy, so you could lower the air conditioning. So you could raise the air conditioning temperature and save energy. That was successful, and then in the summer, and in the winter, they did warm biz, obviously, the other thing around, turn down the temperature, wear sweaters, etc. So, I actually knew somebody that was teaching over in Japan, and I heard about this program, and I was like, wow, that's amazing, and then I read this article that the Environment Ministry 2 years ago was so determined to meet their energy reduction goal that they turned off the heat in the building. They were just like, that's it, no heat. It's like middle of the winter. And they were interviewing employees that worked there, and it's like, yeah, like, we can't have any heat, and they're all bundled up, and they're trying to keep warm from their computers, and it's just an amazing thing, but they're determined to do it. It's part of the culture, too. They have a lot of their culture they can call on to help them. There's a town in Japan recycles 80 different items, and apparently, like, people like, I'm not saying it's desirable, but they spy on their neighbors, and, like, they turn people in if they're not, like, recycling their toothpaste tubes and stuff. It's pretty fun. So anyway, I knew this woman that was teaching in Japan, so I was like, I'm going to really test this. Is this really happening? She's teaching in Japan, and I said, so how was it in the winter? She said, it's just unbelievably cold. They just had the heat so low in the building, and they had to stay like completely bundled up through the entire class. So yeah, it's definitely a very intense program that they are addressing in Japan. Remember, Japan is about the size of Montana. We have 900,000 people. They have 120 million. So they have supreme energy challenges there. Okay, kind of a boring chart until you really look at it. This is the essence. This answers a lot of the objections to moving rapidly to renewable energy. These are technologies, and by the way, our white paper is on our website. Just go to our homepage and you can read the entire thing. There's an executive summary if you just want a little taste of it. That's a short version than the full paper. But these are essentially the critical findings. These are technologies we just discussed. These are the yearly total costs. And by the way, this is all for the United States. We're going to talk about the rest of the world here in just a minute. This is the percent of our economy. This is a very critical thing because people want to know, like, hey, if we do this thing, is it going to be like, really damaging the economy? Come on, 3%. Military budget is $347 billion. The military budget in the United States now is over $500 billion a year. So for less than the cost of the military budget in the United States, we get to have a livable planet in the future. That's something of our enemy. 3%. Keep that in mind. This extremely rapid transition, this energy revolution in the United States can be done investing only 3% of our economy. And then the historical analogy. We proposed 3% investment for a rapid energy transition. We invested 7%, more than double our GDP in World War II to win that war, and actually reached 38% in 1944. Vietnam War, we invested 9.4% in 1968. Again, about 3 times what we're advocating over a 15-year period. So it's definitely doable. Now, is there a working model in the world? Yes. Germany. They have the most aggressive renewable energy program in the world. Here's how it happened. It's such a rational German way to go about it. 2000, the German parliament went to the scientific and engineering establishment in Germany and said, what's the potential for renewable energy for Germany? They got the best people in the country, they went together, they produced a study, they came back and said, 100%, you can run the entire German economy on renewable energy. Every BMW, every Mercedes, every factory light bulb, refrigerator, etc. And they said, great, that's going to become the operating premise of the national government in terms of energy. Again, a rational, less corrupted national government. They're going to get to 40% below 1990 levels by 2020, investing 0.14% of their GDP. Now that's public money. One of the fascinating things about energy investment is that over 90% of the investment comes from private sources, profitable investments. It's not like we're going to take all that money out of general tax revenues. And this is what's happening in Germany. And the German solar and wind resources are vastly inferior to the United States. Not only because it's a much smaller country, it's just because of the resources that they have in terms of insulation and wind speeds. To give you an example to remember, the solar resource, the average solar resource in northern Maine is superior to the average solar resource in the entire country of Germany. We are sitting on an energy gold mine of incomprehensible dimensions in the United States. Okay, now here's another thing here. China. Great. Come up with this great plan in the United States, somehow we get it passed, we start moving in the right direction very rapidly. What about China? Does anybody know how many coal plants they're building in China now, what the rate is? Again, this should be like front page news if this country cared about the future of the planet. They're building 2 coal plants a week in China. Okay? It's just an unbelievable riot of coal burning. We have an answer to that issue. It's a challenging answer, but it's a doable answer, and we feel that anything less than this is not going to be sufficient. You have to address the issue of developing countries. When we first started talking about what to do about global warming, the Kyoto Protocol was designed because the wealthy countries had caused the global warming crisis. Fossil fuel burning, prime driver of global warming. Since 1750, China has produced about 8% of those gases. The United States has produced 30%. You look at all the wealthy countries around the world that are highly industrialized, the bulk of the gases that caused the crisis initially came from the wealthy countries. So they said it's only fair that the wealthy countries start to reduce their emissions. But in the next phase, after Kyoto, which is going to start no later than 2012, we have to address China and India because they're so large and they're growing so rapidly, and also some other major developing countries. Our world GDP is 100%, it's 55 trillion. We provide 20% of the world economy in the United States, other wealthy countries 30%, developing countries 50%. Okay, just some basic stats here of how we can apply Rosie Revisited to the world economy. That produces $1.4 trillion a year. Again, it's about 3% of the economies. $1 trillion, yes, it's a lot of money, but we're producing that kind of wealth. These big numbers, we're only talking about 3%. They're only projected to spend about $275 billion a year. It's going to be a shortfall of over $1 trillion. Some of that is going to be public money. They don't have the money. They can't afford to provide basic social services now in these countries. Where's that money going to come from? You have to be able to answer that question. We have a proposal. This was initially proposed by Ross Gelspan, who wrote The Heat Is On. It's called an International Renewable Energy Transfer Fund. Every day, massive currency flows across borders. Levy a 0.5% tax that'll produce $247 billion a year. That will be distributed to developing countries, not wealthy countries, so that they can help to finance and plan their renewable energy transition. And again, most of the funds will come from profitable private investment. Okay, kind of cutesy, but I want you to remember, this is what we're faced with. We have to address this. Humanity needs to come up with a global emissions deal. It has to happen in the next few years. The political challenge in the United States is to get the U.S. President and the Congress on board with this. And they are so far from being on board. A few months ago, the U.S. House of Representatives voted, it was like 247 to 148, something like that. They admitted that global warming exists. Okay? 17 years after the scientists said, yeah, it exists, and get started on it. This is what they came up with. I mean, they're just so like, it's embarrassing. They're just like this dinosaur sitting there. They just don't get it. So we're going to have to start flogging that dinosaur and make it do things it's not dreaming of doing. It's our only hope. But we did it in World War II. Okay, now timeline. Again, 2012 is when Kyoto runs out. We think it needs to start by 2010. Again, remember the Arctic, remember the forests, remember the ice sheets. Very, very brave things that are already starting to engage. We have no time to waste. Okay, here's the basic timetable. The President, according to the Constitution, is the branch of government that negotiates the treaties, and then, as you know, they present it to the Senate for ratification. What we're planning to do, I mean, basically there's kind of four elements in dealing with a major problem. One, have the problem identified. B, see if it's potentially solvable. C, come up with a solution. And then the fourth, which is where we are now, is generate the political will so that that solution becomes law. It becomes, again, a new culture in the United States. The scientists have identified the problem. Our research and the research of other folks have shown that there is conceivable solutions. Our proposal is the most aggressive proposal in the United States, and it shows how we can execute a plan to address it. The thing that remains is generating political energy in a very short time, and that means each one of us. We all have to think about how we can engage with this activity. And again, in Missoula, we meet a couple times a month. There's many ways to get involved in what we're doing. Okay, again, address some skepticism. Can we really do this? Let's look at when. Okay, 27, fossil fuel displacement. These are the basic stats to get there. We have to build over a million 1 megawatt turbines. This is how much it costs. Growth rate, remember, we're at 38% now. Can we do it? Okay? 136,000 turbines a year. Sounds like a lot. It is a lot. But here's what we do with 1940s technology. Okay? 100,000 1 megawatt wind generators. These things right here. Are you with me? Just kind of calling these wind turbines. This is an airplane factory in World War II. You can't even see the end of the production line. 200%. I mean, this is like, we've done such a long time ago, we can certainly do this. And here's another statistic. 17 million cars sold in the United States every year. 6 million are produced here. We can certainly produce 136,000 wind turbines. And then, again, we have this problem in the United States. In World War II, we had FDR. He was so focused on Hitler. He was so focused on what was going on in Japan, even though he didn't anticipate World War II, the attack on Pearl Harbor. I mean, he was very, very concerned, very effective politician, highly intelligent, and committed to doing the right thing. That's the problem. I mean, he doesn't even get it. But you know what? He's a weakened president. Let's make him do it. There is no way that any president, there's always a political price. And we have to raise the political price of inaction.